Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J vlog series. It is Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025, and on Wednesdays we're talking about scientific literacy. So yes, we've reorganized the blog, and this is the first in our new series on scientific literacy. So I talked about vaccinations several months ago, and I want to readdress the issue in terms of vaccinations and public support. Especially since vaccinations have been probably one of the greatest discoveries of modern medicine, quite frankly, capable of defeating countless different diseases. And perhaps the most famous historically has been the smallpox vaccination, which was the first vaccine ever developed to combat a contagious disease. And smallpox was just this horribly lethal disease that caused the deaths of 20 to 60% of infected adults back in the day and over 80% of infected children. It's just devastating. And history tells us then that the smallpox vaccine was invented by the English physician Edward Jenner back in 1796. Remarkable efficacy of the vaccine led fairly quickly to efforts to start vaccination programs in a range of different countries in the first half of the 19th century. But progress was relatively slow for a variety of reasons, starting with the inability, quite frankly, to produce the vaccine in sufficient quantities. In addition, we're in the earliest stages of vaccination, right, with limited knowledge, a lack of standardized medical practices in place. We're also talking about the earliest stages of industrialization in a world that was far more disconnected, if you will, than the one we live in today. So it wasn't until 1959, in fact, that the World Health Organization, WHO, formulated a global plan to eradicate smallpox. Unfortunately, their campaign suffered from a lack of funds and personnel, lack of full commitment from many countries, and vaccine shortages still. And despite WHO's best efforts, smallpox was still widespread even as late as the mid-1960s, which witnessed regular outbreaks across South America, Africa, and Asia. The intensified eradication program began in 1967 with the promise of renewed efforts. Many countries now had labs that were able to produce much more consistent, high-quality vaccines, along with a range of other technological advances, integrated case surveillance systems to monitor the progress, and then finally, mass vaccination campaigns. When smallpox was actually eradicated then in 1979, the disease had killed an estimated 300 to 500 million people worldwide in the 20th century. Scientific research in the field of immunology have only accelerated over the last several decades, and nowadays we understand quite well the spread of infectious diseases, the underlying mechanisms that are associated with a vast array of potentially lethal diseases that humans are prone to encounter. And of course, we live in a dynamic world where there are always new diseases emerging, so we have to be quite vigilant. But in light of our tremendous medical advances and the obvious benefits to eradicating deadly diseases, if possible, why are there still so many people, and a growing number for that matter, who are what we describe these days as anti-vaxxers? So let's first describe the issue a bit more rigorously, shall we? So, in other words, what do we know? What are the general views about vaccines, the population as a whole? What do we know about the attitudes of the general population? Something that's actually been studied quite a bit. As best we can determine, the clear majority of folks still are supportive of vaccines, especially as measured recently from population surveys of Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So more than 13,000 folks were surveyed from across these three countries in particular and asked several attitudinal questions about their support for vaccines. And so, again, they were asked what's their level of support to the following. Okay? So just you can do this yourself if you like. Getting vaccines is a good way to protect children from disease. Again, how strongly do you agree or disagree with that? Generally, I do what my doctor recommends about vaccines. The second question they asked. New vaccines are recommended only if they are safe. Again, do you agree, disagree? Strongly agree, strongly disagree. I'm concerned about serious side effects of vaccines. Some vaccines cause autism in healthy children. Parents should have the right to refuse vaccines required for schools for any reason. And vaccinations are one of the most significant achievements in improving public health. And so, based on the cumulative responses to this series of questions, the researchers created 4 different categories to kind of characterize the public support or relative lack thereof of vaccines. So, the first one is strong support, which is comprised of people who strongly believe in the safety and the efficacy of vaccines. And if anything, some might have some mild concerns about the potential side effects of vaccines. Then there's those who are supporters with concerns. That is, they express confidence in terms of vaccines as an important health tool, but at the same time, they're not quite as keen in terms of new vaccines and have some concerns about safety and possible side effects as well. Then there's a smaller group that are the vaccine hesitant, who they tend to score at the midpoint on the scale that I've just described previously in terms of the importance of vaccines and following recommendations. But they do have serious concerns about potential side effects, and they are also highly supportive of parents' choice, if you will, to refuse vaccines. And they do attach more credence to this notion that vaccines might be linked to or cause autism. And then finally, there are the anti-vaxxers, who are skeptical of vaccines on all fronts and who strongly support parents' rights to refuse vaccination and so on. And so here's what the overall evidence looks like in general. So you see then the strongest support in general for vaccines appears to be in the UK, followed by Canada, and then followed by the United States. And again, in the US, you certainly also have a higher proportion overall of combined anti-vaxxers and the vaccine hesitant group as well. And so what are the social correlates of these particular results? Well, they're fairly consistent across countries. That is, the strongest support can be found amongst the more highly educated, meaning those with college or university degrees, those who are older, and those who tend to identify as more liberal in terms of their political orientations, as well as having a greater likelihood of belonging to the more liberal or left-leaning parties in each of the 3 countries. Conversely, the strongest opposition in the anti-vaxxers tend to be less educated, very conservative, or right-wing in their political orientations and party memberships, while age drops out as a significant predictor or correlate. And then also I should mention that African Americans in the US are also more likely to be anti-vax. Not surprisingly, the majorities of those who fall into the vaccine hesitant or the anti-vax categories thought the COVID-19 vaccines were not especially safe, while more than 3/4 of those who were strongly or moderately supportive of vaccines thought the COVID vaccines were safe. So there's the divide right there. So obviously everyone's entitled to their opinions, which may or may not be considered reasonable or rational, depending upon your information and what you consider to be the most compelling evidence, if you will. Most people, of course, are not all that familiar with the scientific or laboratory testing, which would reveal that the vaccine approvals have to meet these incredibly high or rigorous standards before governments are going to approve of their distribution and usage. And at the same time, we're quite well aware of the potential risks and side effects that can be involved. But you have to be willing to do a deeper dive into the full range of evidence before you can arrive at reasonable conclusions. So most of us then have to rely then on the scientific community and the experts of the front lines who are conducting the research. And even better, of course, would be the studies published by those independent research scientists, those who have no stake in the production of vaccines or in any industry interest, as it were, or the funding, if you will, that might be driving their research. So I guess the greater the level of independence and the freedom from oversight by corporate or other interests, the better. And that's kind of the key piece of information that I'd like to pass along, if you will. Doing your own research, your own online research, is not even remotely comparable to doing actual laboratory research or scientific research in general, or key reviews of all the available scientific evidence. And so I strongly recommend, in terms of scientific literacy, that people should be trusting the most independent and rigorous studies that one can find, especially if you look at the what are called the meta-analytic reviews that summarize these vast swaths of the research. Most folks in the general public, of course, don't approach research in an objective or an unbiased way, or they don't go looking at the full range of scientific research on the subject matter, right? So it's very difficult to be objective or unbiased as a general consumer of this information. Instead, people tend to look for, as you know, and we've talked about this before, they tend to look for evidence that supports their already preconceived notions or beliefs or perspectives. And that leads to my final point. That is this tendency then to rely upon today's social media platforms in this fast-paced and interconnected digital era in which we live. So whether it's breaking news, the scientific discoveries, cultural phenomena of any kind, political developments, and so on, social media outlets provide the dominant conduits through which so many people increasingly obtain information. And of course, they can reach these audiences almost instantaneously these days. But most importantly, the point I want to make here is that the vast majority of that information is largely unvetted. So anyone can post almost anything, right? Without regard to oversight or verification or credentials or credibility. Basically, any bozo, including yours truly, if you think of me that way, can start a vlog series and post whatever they like regularly online, or say just about anything they like as well. And so social media platforms have emerged then as these incredibly powerful tools that play a significant role in facilitating communication and the widespread dissemination of information amongst individuals. But at the same time, misleading information and full-blown conspiracy theories can be shared just as readily. And so that's where we have to be especially careful, especially in terms of and indeed, the research shows that these have had a major global impact in terms of public perceptions on for example, the effectiveness of vaccines, especially where public institutions are already or more under attack. And so the net result has been a decline in the trust in the scientific community, and specifically in terms of vaccination coverage, perhaps more in the United States than just about anywhere else. One more study involved a global evaluation of the effects of social media and online foreign disinformation campaigns on vaccination rates and attitudes towards vaccine safety. And lo and behold, using a large N cross-country regression framework, they evaluated the effects of social media on vaccine hesitancy globally. And the researchers studied social media use by the general public and the level of negatively oriented discourse about vaccines based on the geocoded tweets over a 2-year period. And they examined basically what proportion of the public in each of 137 different countries felt that the vaccines were unsafe. And then they looked at the annual data on vaccination rates. And lo and behold, they found that the use of social media to organize offline actions tended to be highly predictive of the belief that vaccines are unsafe, with such beliefs mounting as the organization occurred more forcefully on social media. And so the prevalence then of these foreign disinformation campaigns is highly statistically and substantively significant then in predicting a drop in average vaccination coverage over time. And then finally, they also found support for the connection of foreign disinformation with negative social media activity regarding vaccinations, and that led to a substantial rise in anti-vax tweets by about 10 to 15%. So in short, there's a significant statistical relationship between organization on social media and the public doubts of vaccine safety. In addition, there's a strong relationship between foreign disinformation campaigns and declining vaccination coverage. And therein, I think, lies an especially compelling challenge to our overall scientific literacy and general knowledge. Bad actors in any sphere who flood our social media and dissemination channels with bad and distorted or misleading information or outright lies. And so that, of course, has the adverse consequence as well of impacting public discourse and our ability to then fashion sensible policies that the vast majority of citizens can get behind. You're never obviously going to get 100% agreement or understanding of these issues, but it'd certainly be nice to approach a much higher percentage, or to get at least 3/4 or even upwards of 90% of the public on board, because I think it's in our shared interest to get there. Again, it doesn't mean that science is infallible or that we don't have problems, especially in the developmental stages of vaccines. The knowledge emerges over time, and we don't always get it right immediately. But if we do indeed do the science correctly, fund the good actors and the scientists and those who are the independent researchers to do the best research possible, generally speaking, we still find that we can produce remarkable results and remarkably effective vaccines. Again, at least on a case-by-case basis. I'm not suggesting that every vaccine is going to have the equally significant effects, because, again, the mechanisms involved are extraordinarily complex. And the diseases, and at the microbiological level, there's mutations, and nature has a way of trying to outwit us. So science is really challenged, in terms of keeping up. But it's our best and greatest hope still, unless you can come up with a better source or a better mechanism for figuring out how to treat disease. So, much more to say about vaccines and the general public's information and scientific literacy. But for now, as ever, until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And get vaccinated, at least on the for the diseases where we've got really compelling evidence. And trust the scientist where they've done the great research, okay? We'll see you next time.